People who watch security cameras for a living, what creepy things have you tried to forget? So many of these will give me nightmares, so I'll throw one in the mix that I never want to forget. A year back, I was working at a hostel and we have security cameras throughout the building. Watching the footage from the camera in the kitchen. It is about 2 a.m. and a very drunk guest walks in, grabs some snacks, and accidentally drops an empty bottle on the ground. He then proceeds to kick it up into the air, then kick it again in air, where it flies across the entire length of the room perfectly into the recycling bin. In his drunken state, he threw up his hands, ran around in a circle, clearly in shock at how amazing he is. Then, after looking around, he noticed there was none there to see it. After that, he looked visibly depressed and stumbled back out of the kitchen. Kid pooped in an aisle of Walmart and an old lady slipped in it. Working in a rehearsal studio for bands, we had camera at the front desk that pointed down the hall with the entrances to all the rooms. One day I'm sitting there, minding my own business, and noticed there was a girl sitting in the hallway outside one of the studios. She had come in with the band that was practicing, and I just assumed she didn't feel like sitting in the loud space with the band. So I got up and went to tell her she was welcome to sit in the lobby where there was a couch and TV. I got around the corner and she wasn't there. I went back the desk and there she was, sitting in the hall waiting outside the room. So I went back out to find her not there again. I assumed she had gone into the room, so I went and knocked, and they informed me that the girl had left a while before, just after they had gotten started practicing. So I went back, and there she was, still on the camera. It was only then that I realized I had accidentally bumped the freeze frame button for the monitor. I used to do asset protection for a Walmart in a very heroin-addicted area. The creepiest thing was seeing how fast someone would go from completely normal to absolutely out of it in the span of a year because of the drug. You could build a timeline of their demise through CCTV, pictures and video. One man in particular really stood out to me. The first time I apprehended him, he was very polite and intelligent, just stealing to get his fix. A year later, and the fourth time I caught him, he was basically a shell of a man. He tried running from me, and I looked him right in the eyes and said, "I know you, Gary last name. Please don't run." The look on his face of someone knowing him who he couldn't even remember will always stay with me. When I worked as a security officer, it was my first week on the job. I watched my boss and another officer try to talk a guy off of the top of our parking structure. Didn't work, watched him jump off and land next to an employee who was coming in for her shift. Guy hit the ground so hard it exploded the belt right off of his pants. I will never forget watching that. I'm not in security, but I work for a bank, and part of my job is checking the cameras in the morning for pings overnight, and then making sure all the pings were just squirrels or leaves, etc. Last week, I saw a ping on our back entrance camera, and when I went to watch the video, it was a guy I didn't recognize walking back and forth in front of the door at 3 a.m. for a solid 20 minutes, like just pacing the whole time, and every couple minutes he'd stop and walk up to the door and stare into the camera. Then he'd go back to pacing. A car eventually went by, and that must have set something in him off, because he legit ran away and didn't come back. We ended up calling the cops about it, but I still have no idea who he was or what his deal was. What? One time there was a spider on the lens. It was big. It stayed there for like 3 days. Was watching CCTV footage of a parking deck, and on the 9th level there's this guy sitting in the middle of the deck, banging his head on one of the pillars. All of a sudden the guy just stops and runs to the edge. Without stopping or jumping, he flings himself over the edge. I immediately called dispatch and told them what had happened. Few days later I was offered counseling for those events. Mostly lots of intercourse. I've had to turn on the microphone and tell them to stop it or they'll be thrown out of the college gym. I work in a retail store, and for a while I worked security here. Watching the security cameras wasn't technically my job, but we were consistently short-handed in that department, and the manager was grooming me for promotion, so I got to fill in and watch the cameras occasionally. One day when we were reviewing footage from overnights, we saw this teenager calmly set down his shopping basket, take off his hat and glasses, and just charge at a wall. Hit it head on. He did this 2 more times. When he was done, his face was a bloody mess, and he put his hat and glasses back on and just left. Weirded me right the hell out. I used to do IT support for a company that had a lot of heavy machinery moving around inside a big warehouse-type area. This giant front-end loader would scoop up material and dump it into a hopper. Along the sides of the floor were these huge concrete barriers. I've heard them called Jersey barriers and mafia blocks. But they are about 10 feet tall, and this one guy's life was ended when the front-end loader inadvertently scooped the base of the barrier and landed on one of 2 guys walking shoulder to shoulder through the plant. I was tasked to review the footage, then make of them to be then ensured that the footage worked and was self-executable and able to be run from a USB stick. So I had to watch the footage of this guy get killed over a dozen times. I, too, was offered counseling for just watching the video. I used to work at a university, and last Easter we had a break-in. We found the footage of the guy going in at 2 private message, leaving at around 3 and not really taking anything. Fast forward to 7 private message, and the guy comes back in and is walking around the auditorium till 6 a.m. the next morning. In that time, he proceeded to strip into his underwear, steal and wear a mask the Japanese exchange students made for the teacher, and smoke a shit ton. He managed to steal 6 full bags of random items. We've dubbed him as the Jack-Off Bandit. Wasn't a security officer, but I worked at a 24/7 gas station for a while. One night, my coworker accidentally killed himself while at work, and I made the mistake of watching the footage. He went to the back of the store with a bag of drugs, probably cocaine, snorted it, and started acting funny for about 10 minutes. He then sits in the back office and gets fidgety, thrashing around until finally he just goes limp in the chair. He had died of a heart attack and sat there for 5 hours before anybody came in. Thought the absence of an employee was strange and called the cops. It was really weird seeing people come in and act all pissy for the lack of service. They'd just leave thinking someone was lazy. But nah, dude was dead. I was working at pub in Sydney and watching the CCTV when I saw a guy continually cross and uncross his legs while playing a poker slot machine. After a few minutes, he walked to a corner of the room, took a shit, and proceeded to go back to playing his machine. Talk about being addicted, edit, holy shit, this blew up. To answer some of your questions, this kind of thing is not rare. Mostly it's people pissing themselves. These machines are evil and designed to get people addicted, and that results in some people not being able to pull themselves away, even to use a bathroom. Finally, thank God I'm a manager, but telling someone it was their job sucked. Not a CCTV operator, but I was chummy with the security guards I used to work with. It was in a large 3-story retail building in a city center, and we had all sorts of folks coming in and out. We had a phantom wanker and phantom shitter who would leave their bodily fluids in random places. They were known as Jack the Shitter and Wanksy, and it turned out to be the same guy. He was clever and knew where all the security camera were. He'd cased the joint. The only reason he got busted was because they were moved. By far the funniest thing I saw was a guy being chased into the building on the 2nd floor by the police. He ran around the shop for about 5 minutes while being chased by police and our security guards. It was great watching it on different screens as he moved through the building. Anyway, he got to ground floor and underestimated the drop onto the escalator and broke his leg, and the escalator him brought back up to the feet of the security guards who were chasing him. It was brilliant. I used to do IT support for a charity that supplied housing and support for homeless people. A large proportion also had mental health issues, so there were a fair amount of interesting events that happened. Being in IT, I avoided experiencing most of it firsthand, though I was threatened with being stabbed on about my 3rd day anyway. I come in one Monday, and there's an email labeled urgent, saying there was an incident at the stairwell of one of the properties on Sunday night, and could I pull the relevant CCTV footage and put it on a DVD. I had to do this fairly frequently. I skip through the footage, find the incident, usually a fight or blatant drug dealing, and burn it to DVD for the police. The email never mentioned what the incident was, so I skip through the footage and watch as a clearly very agitated man ties a rope around a stair rail at the top of the stairs, then his neck, looks over the rail, and then just casually tips forward over it. The rope flipped him round, and he dangled there twitching for far too long before he just stopped. So yeah, that was a fun Monday. We have an old fountain at my apartment building that has a large eagle statue. One night I had to check the security cameras because of a break-in, and at 2 a.m. I came across footage of about 5 guys taking turns humping the eagle. One of them even stole the Santa hat I had on it. Not for a living, but we had security cameras installed on the property whilst we were living in South Africa. We had a monitor set up next to the bed so we could see what was happening on the 4 cameras without having to get up out of bed. One night we heard something, so we turn on the monitor and see nothing unusual. I'm ready to go back to sleep, but my partner thinks something is off about one of the cameras. Does this camera look like it's pointing in a different direction slightly? She asks. No, same as always, and it's back to bed for me. She isn't convinced, so she starts watching the recordings. True enough, footage of some dude prowling around on the property, and the camera catches him adjusting it. The terrifying bit, the way his face looked beneath the balaclava. Murder mask is what my significant other called it. Pretty creepy shit. Whenever we have a bad crash or anything serious happen, we usually search for cameras that captured the incident. Can't tell you how many times I've watched people die on video. Not really creepy, but just not fun to do. Spent a few years working front desk for various shifts at a few hotels, moved a lot during this time, so I got a pretty big sampling of people from here and there. But the one thing I will never forget was right here in my home state of KY in broad daylight. A woman who did not have a room with us walked into the pool area from the large, sliding glass window, speaking on her cell phone with a bag hanging from that hand, and a toddler walking with her on the other hand. She let go of the toddler, then proceeded to get completely nude and continue her conversation standing in the pool area, not the pool itself. Just the pool area. I saw a guy at my old job have a seizure on camera. It was at a liquor store. He was a town regularly and never took care of himself. Looked off, but not even drunk. In the middle of counting his change, his head snaps up in the air like he's looking to the heavens above, then just falls right onto the ground. His head missed this wooden wine display by an inch or two. He flailed around, and all the change he had was scattered along the ground, while one of the guys I work with ended up coming and taking him to the hospital. He was okay, but ended up spending a couple days there. The best part of the story is while this guy is seizing out, he was in front of the cooler of 40S. So this one impatient customer, you can see his head sort of looking for a way around to get his booze. He steps over this dude, gingerly opens the cooler door, and grabs his old English 40, before walking up to the register. Was my mom's experience. She works on a cruise ship and has to go through surveillance footage and put the footage in different folders. She said she has nightmares of one simple but creepy thing. One night a guy walked out of a cabin into the view of the camera and stood for a few minutes, doing nothing. Then looked up at the camera, moved as close to it as possible, and smiled into the camera for about 5 minutes. But she said watching it felt as if he was looking into the camera for hours. She said it's just something she can't get out of her head, and it made her feel so uncomfortable. Maybe a bit off topic, but I got to watch myself be jumped, smashed over the head, threatened, and robbed on CCTV. That was fun. Creepy, then funny. I was a property manager at a giant apartment complex for a year. Part of my job was to take complaints that came in during my off hours, review tapes to see what the cams caught, then address the problem. We got calls for people ducking in the spa a lot. On the video, a young couple was doing the biz in the spa in just about every position. I recognized them and got the form out to issue the warning when the maintenance supervisor says, "Hold on." He zooms all the way in and across the property. He could see a woman we all knew sitting on her patio smoking a cigarette watching. We thought, oh man, she's enjoying the show. Then we noticed there's the glow of the cig and a second glow, a small red light. She was taping the whole thing with a handy cam. She was a pastor at the local church who was always telling us how bad we were for allowing smoking and drinking on the property. She recommended multiple times that we update our rules to align more with the moral teachings of the church.